All right, so I'm just going to continue and just kind of describe a little bit more about what my grandpa taught and how it kind of confused me. So, like I said, I was always anti-religion. I think it's because I saw religion as white supremacist, But now, and I liked my grandpa because he seemed anti-religion too, but at the same time, he seemed kind of spiritual and religious, and I didn't like that. I always saw spiritual and religious as white supremacist, like because I'd see like the people who are because my grandpa had like those seemed like spiritual leanings, like being against abortion and being against homosexuality. My grandpa said there's no such thing as homosexuals. So I'd be like, oh, you're against homosexuality. But he'd say he's not against it, but he would say that it could be self-confirmatory, stuff like that. But I'd be like, oh, well, you're just a Nazi. You're white supremacist. The only reason why you're against abortion is because you want to maintain the white race. That's the way I looked at it. So I was a feminist. Like, let women do what they want to do. Isn't that what you teach Grandpa? That the bad, because I would just cherry pick what my grandpa taught. The bad's good and the good is bad. The women who are cheating, they are more likely to get themselves in trouble. So they're more likely to be getting the flow than the people who are in conformity and in religious conformity. I want to see the good is bad, the bad is the good. You see, because as you taught me, Grandpa, conformity isn't the flow. So, and people in nonconformity could be closer to the flow. So, the promiscuous women, will be even closer to the flow. But again, what was my underlying motivation? My underlying motivation was I didn't like the white race. I saw myself as Jewish and I wanted to defeat the white race. So I wanted to promote promiscuity. It's really that simple, man. It's crazy, but that's the way I was. But I was a communist, anti-white. So, but this is what my grandpa taught. Like some of the things my grandpa would teach me, and this type of stuff that would confuse me. Where I'd be like, yeah, he's anti-religion like me, good. But then at the same time, I was confused. So, as I said, my grandpa was kind of taught that God is energy, and I like that because I'm like, okay, well, it's not like, okay, so it's not like what the Christians believe, and I was definitely anti-Christian, So, because I saw Christian as the most white supremacist, but so my grandpa taught that. That, for instance, like I asked my grandpa one time, I was like, Grandpa, when you pray to God, is it okay to pray to God? Because my grandpa would say that God is energy, so I'll be like, why would you pray to God? My grandpa would say, praying to God is acknowledging that there is a flow. So, but my grandpa would say, like, but if you believe that you're praying to a separate person or a separate being, that's dualistic software. There is no separate thing. Like my grandpa would say, there's a wave in the ocean. The ocean is God. We are waves in the ocean, but it's all the ocean. In a sense, you are God then, but you're also not God because the ocean is God, but you're just a wave, right? But the idea that you would pray to a separate being, that's based off the illusion that there is a self and other, that there is things. But my grandpa would say there is no thing. But now I understand what my grandpa's saying, but I didn't understand then. But, if you're in the flow, he's acknowledging the flow, that when you transcend the body, now you're in the flow. And that's when you're receptive to inspiration and stuff. But at the time, I didn't understand that. So I'm like, okay, so my grandpa's just anti-religious. He's kind of more scientific and wants to think that everything is energy. So I like that because, again, I didn't like Christianity or Islam or any religion because I thought that all religion maintained division and maintained the white race. Because I thought religion was conservative. I was a Marxist, and Marxists don't like religion. So another example would be like, I asked my grandpa one time, in the Bible it says, do not follow vain philosophy. So I was like, so Grandpa, is what you're teaching a vain philosophy? Should we follow? And my grandpa was like, no, Christianity is a vain philosophy. What I teach is what Jesus really taught, most likely. So I was like, okay, that's good because I didn't like Christianity because I saw Christianity as white supremacist and it maintained. So I wanted to undermine and uproot. So when I would write my based on true story books, I would write these ideas that my grandpa taught. And I wanted to disseminate them because I wanted to undermine and uproot Christianity. But so my grandpa would say that, Jesus did not teach that he wanted to be worshipped. What he taught is that, but my grandpa would say, don't believe anything because if you believe anything, you're attached. And so he would say, don't believe anything that he teaches, right? But this is his, his current framework of understanding. Don't believe it though, because if you believe, then you're not open to the flow. But my grandpa would say, Jesus did not want to be worshipped because that's dualistic software. And that's the confirmation of the self and other. My grandpa would say that Jesus taught the flow. And he taught people not to want to save themselves, but to transcend the self. So like I said, the rich ruler, right? He goes to Jesus. He's like, good teacher, how can I get eternal life? And then Jesus says to him, why do you call me good? Because he could sense that this person was pious and or being obsequious, and that's self-confirmatory. And then the good teacher's like, well, you know, how do I get it? And Jesus says, let go of all your belongings and follow me. So Jesus could sense that this person was still attached. He still believed that he was a separate self. And this is what he needed, because he needed to let go of attachment so that he could be open to the flow. That's what my grandpa would teach, right? But my grandpa would say that, yeah, of course, Christians ended up misinterpreting the Bible, and they thought that that Jesus wanted to be worshipped as a separate being, as opposed to recognizing that everything is one, that there is no thing. And so I was like, I like these ideas, because I'm like, okay, this is kind of anti-Christian. So like another thing that my grandpa taught was like, so basically he would say like, when Christians say, you know, you have to believe in Jesus, my grandpa would be like, well, my grandpa told me, he said, I think that was probably a mistranslation. So I like this idea, because I'm like, okay, good, because I want to undermine and destroy Christianity. But then this is what my grandpa taught, though. He said that, they thought it was mistranslation. But then this is a crazy thing. Then I was listening to this Bible scholar, and he was saying that actually was a mistranslation. That when it said believe in Jesus, actually the correct translation in Greek is believe into Jesus. But, you know, that's hard. It's hard. You can't really say that in English. So I was thinking, okay, well, maybe my grandpa's right. Maybe what it means is believe into the flow. You know, to ultimately transcend belief to the flow. So I was like, okay, good. Because I wanted to undermine and destroy Christianity. But again, my grandpa would say, though, to believe in Jesus, you know, I was then incorporating my grandpa's teachings in assimilating them into my dualistic software, where I want to destroy Christianity. So then I would assimilate them into dualistic software where I wasn't in the flow. But my grandpa would say, okay, but Christians who are, you know, worshiping Jesus, my grandpa would say, you know, those beliefs can be effective and can be helpful for them, because, you know, they ultimately what they're doing is they're recognizing Jesus. Ultimately, there is one truth, there is one flow, and it's beneficial, even if they're doing the rituals and even if they believe in a separate God. My grandpa would say that idols are training wheels. So like if I asked my grandpa, I was like, okay, what about the like Hindus who worship idols? My grandpa would be like, okay. He said, the reason why people say idol worship is bad is because my grandpa said there is no thing. So if you're worshiping an idol, you believe that there's a self and that there's another, that there's an idol, and that's a separate thing. But my grandpa would say that they could be training wheels, though. So to like completely annihilate idol worship, my grandpa would say, you know, the crazy thing is, the people who don't worship idols, they might not be in the flow. And someone who worships idols, he might get in the flow. So to annihilate people who worship idols, that's not the flow. The pagans could get in the flow, and the non-pagans may not be in the flow. And you see that kind of in the Hindu mythology, where the Shiva worshippers, they want to destroy the Vishnu worshippers, because the Vishnu worshippers worship idols, and Shukracharya, who's the devil, Satan, he tries to kill the Vishnu idol worshippers who worship Indra and the demigods. But Vishnu says, you know, he ends up saving them, and he says, hey, allow people to worship the idols and worship the demigods, because, well, my grandpa would say, they can get in the flow pretty much, or, you know, attain salvation or whatever. So the Shiva worshippers, what my grandpa would probably say, they have a higher aspiration. Like they recognize, hey, they're not in the flow. They don't recognize everything as one. But at the same time, the Shiva worshippers who might say, oh, we recognize everything as one and there is no thing and everything's energy, like my grandpa wanted to teach, right? But they might not really be in the flow. So as my grandpa said, there is no formula to the flow. So these are the types of things my grandpa's teaching me. So I'm thinking that maybe my grandpa's anti-religion. So again, I took these profound ideas, but I incorporated them into my dualistic software, my anti-white, because I saw myself as Jewish and I wanted to destroy the white race. So like I said, in like 2020, when COVID hit, I'm basically, okay, I'll give another example. Like in 20, right before COVID hit, when I was staying with my grandpa, we were watching Billy Graham, and my grandpa made fun of him because he's like, you know, a lot of it's emotionalism and sentimentalism, They do a lot of them. But now my grandpa would say though, sometimes the music, singing music, it can get people in harmony, transcend the self, and it can be soothing, and there can be benefits to it. But sometimes also my grandpa would say sometimes it is self-confirmatory. But my grandpa has that discernment. I don't have discernment like my grandpa, but he has very like profound discernment in all areas of everything. So my grandpa's like, and that's why it's sad that he's dead, because I wish I could continue to learn from him. But it was a bad situation anyways, because my family had already what my family's done to me is kind of messed up. But I'll get to this. But so my grandpa's teaching me. I'm asking my grandpa, what do you think about Billy Graham? My grandpa didn't like it because he's like, Billy Graham, he's teaching to save the self as opposed to transcend the self. That there is no self. Now, like later I would ask my grandpa, like, okay, what about joy? Like, having, because then I'll think, okay, so there's no self. So should we just be all like depressed and like, there is no self? But my grandpa be like, no, joy opens you more to transcend the self, to the flow. So again, it's very intricate. There's a lot of sophistication and complexity to the teachings, right? So you don't want to be like, oh, there's no self, so I'm just going to, no, my grandpa would say, no, be joyful. Being joyful opens you up and opens you to the flow, the transcendence of the self, right? And oneness. So, but again, like I couldn't break out of my dualistic software, predator-prey software toward white people, because I think it's because I saw myself as Jewish and I wanted to destroy the white race. So but I maintained this. So I don't know. It's just my whole life I was that way. My whole life I saw myself as more of a person of color. So for instance, like when COVID hit, I remember I was saying like I believed that the people who were against Bill Gates were just white supremacists, because Bill Gates is, making vaccines to help the people in Africa, and Bill Gates wants to help the people in Africa, and the white supremacist religious people, right-wingers, don't like him because he wants to help black people, and they're just anti-black. They're just racist. That's the way I wanted to see things, right? So I'm posting these ideas. Now even my grandpa, like I asked my grandpa, well, what do you think of Bill Gates? And my grandpa was like, what do you think of his like GMO stuff? And my grandpa's like, well, there's a higher aspiration. He wants to feed more people. And even if it's through GMO, there's a aspiration to, it could be a part of oneness consciousness. You want to feed more people. And even like probably, I didn't ask my grandpa specifically, but even probably the vaccines, it could be based off oneness consciousness. But again, there's complexities with everything. So like there's also the idea, like the good I would, I do not, that which I would not, I end up doing. Is Bill Gates anti-white? I don't know. I don't know much about Bill Gates, but my grandpa seemed to kind of like Bill Gates in ways, like because that's the other thing. So like when I was with my uncle, my uncle was basically a Nazi. My uncle was a big fan of Fox News. He didn't like CNN, and my grandpa would watch CNN, and my uncle would say that's the cabal news, the Jewish news. And my uncle thought that there was a Jewish Italian conspiracy to destroy the white race. And my uncle told me, he said, I told my uncle, like, grandpa likes CNN, and my uncle was like, yeah, because your grandpa's a part of he's like, he's sold out to the cabal. Whether it's intentional or he's just brainwashed, my uncle thought that my grandpa had sold out to the cabal, to the Jewish Italian conspiracy to destroy the white race. So, but like my uncle, he didn't like the Hollywood actors and stuff, right? Because he thought that they were all part of the cabal. But my grandpa, he'd be like, no, these people are high functioning people. My grandpa, like I said, to me, he always seemed like someone who like extolled the victors and looked down upon the victims, like a victim blamer, but a victor extoller. So they're successful. And my grandpa's like, yeah, they're successful people. And because they're highly functioning people, they're people who are in the flow, a lot of them. But my uncle was like, yeah, you sold out to the cabal. You like the Hollywood actors and stuff. But so I'm just trying to decipher my grandpa's teaching. So he's confusing me. I don't really understand exactly what he's about. But like I said, in 2020, Okay, like another thing my grandpa taught me. There was like this commercial, and it showed everybody worshiping like a piece of bread with a uh like Jesus's face burnt into it, and everyone was worshiping it. And my grandpa was like, yeah, in the flow, there's like revelations and stuff, right? But then people try to hold on to those revelations, and that's like the piece of bread crust, like, I guess that's like an idol where, something great happens and you try to hold on to it. This might not be what my grandpa taught, but I'm trying to understand what he taught. But and then you start worshiping it, and you start worship, but really what you really want is the flow. And you cannot make a formula, you cannot encapsulate the flow, but people try to encapsulate the flow through things like the bread crust with Jesus' face on it. So another example of that was like my grandpa told me the story of when Jesus goes on the mountain. He said that his disciples, he says he has like an epiphany, and he sees Elijah and Moses come to him, and he has an epiphany. And then I think it was Peter and some other guy, one of his disciples, they want to build booths, but Jesus is like, no, don't build any booths. My grandpa said what this represents is, I can't remember exactly what my grandpa taught, but it was something like people, when they're in the flow, they have thoughts and they have emotions and actions, and they want to encapsulate them and they want to memorize them, and they might look back, and that's when formulas are created, right? I would think of it like basketball. Like I do a really great move in basketball because I was in the flow, right? But then later I might try to encapsulate that move. But my grandpa would say, but you don't want to encapsulate anything. You want to stay in the flow. In the where you're not even aware what you're just you lost yourself. And that's when the most perfect stuff happens. And that's when you can see the truth, when you transcend the ego. But my grandpa said people want to encapsulate and make formulas. And then my grandpa says that's where religion comes from, when they try to encapsulate the flow. So this is what my grandpa teaches. So, but again, these are very profound things. But at this time in 2020, I still hadn't understood. Okay, so my grandpa's trying to teach me stuff, but at the same time, I still didn't understand. So I'm still didn't realize that my anti-whiteness was not the flow. Because I'm thinking like, okay, I'm transcending the ego. I'm part of the flow, Grandpa. Yeah, isn't the flow race mixing and hippie? Like, isn't that what you mean by the flow? I didn't understand. Like, aren't I transcending the self by wanting race mixing? Like, isn't that transcending the self? I didn't realize. So in my Based on True Story book that I wrote in 2020, I was basically like, I was just being like, because I thought that my grandpa was anti Fox News, because my grandpa watched CNN and my uncle watched Fox News. But he's not really anti-Fox News. But so I thought he was. So I'm basically saying like, yeah, I believe that Fox News is actually, idol worship, because it is about, I thought it was white supremacist, and it's focusing on the salvation and protection and promotion of the self, but there is no self. But again, I'm talking like I've transcended the self and there is no self, but I had an ego agenda. I saw myself as Jewish and I wanted to destroy the white race. And my grandpa even, like, this is another thing. Like, I remember one time, I asked my grandpa, what do you think of Ron Paul? And I didn't like Ron Paul because Ron Paul, I thought he was more conservative, and I thought that, he was against the banks and stuff. I always thought the people who were against the banks, like the Federal Reserve, were white supremacists because and they were anti-Jew. So my ego didn't allow me to see things, right? Because I see myself as Jewish, and I was always just more leftist, right? So, but my grandpa, he said he liked Ron Paul, and I was like, but I didn't like Ron Paul, and like Ali G or Sacha Baron Cohen, he had that thing where he pretended to be gay, and Ron Paul didn't like him, and I didn't like how Ron Paul didn't like Sacha Baron Cohen being Bruno, the gay guy, because I thought, oh yeah, Ron Paul, he's just a typical white supremacist. He doesn't like gay people. Because, gay people, white people, the white supremacists don't like gay people because the gay people can't spread the white genes, and that's the way I saw things. But my grandpa was like, no, my grandpa would say sometimes the conservatives, they're thinking outside the box too, and they're part of the flow too. So, but I wanted to denigrate this conservative. So I'm like, but my grandpa was a little bit more CNN oriented at this time, right? So then I thought that, because my grandpa stopped teaching me. My grandpa was mad at me because he wanted, we got in an argument. He was like, Ryan, if you're going to be staying in Washington, you need to get a job, and, be a part of the anti-entropic rewarding function. And we got in an argument, and he told me, I'm not interested in teaching you anymore. So I wrote this based on true story book to get my grandpa to teach me again. But I'm thinking that I'm on his side. So I'm thinking I'm anti-religion, and my grandpa's anti-religion. Because my grandpa's like, if you're in the flow, you don't have any formulas. And a lot of religion is formulas. But again, my grandpa says, like, rituals, they can help you get in the flow, right? So my grandpa's full of contradictions and paradoxes, right? There is no formula to the flow. But so, but I'm writing because I went back to my anti-white communist thing, and I'm writing like, I think that Fox News is actually the real Baal worship, because the people who worship Baal, they were trying to create rain, which is fertility. And the Fox News people are just white supremacists, and they just want fertility for the white race. And, and so actually Fox News is is the evil Baal worshipers, and the Satan is really, the white supremacists and the Fox News and stuff. But not so fast. It's not really true. But I was basically, I went back to the leftist extreme. I went back to the leftist extreme and back to my anti-white. So it wasn't just me. Like, I remember another one of my friends who's like Arab, but he also has Jewish ancestry. He's like, some woman was like, this is when all the Black Lives Matter riots are going on and stuff. And this woman was like, if you don't like our country, then get out. And then he posted her writing that to him, so he seemed like an anti-white Jew. And then there was one of my other friends, a Jewish guy. He was like posting, the white people were holding the guns, and he was like, these people are bad, they're holding their guns. And, it seemed like another anti-white guy. Now, it's complicated because, like, here's another thing that my grandpa would teach, though. Like, there's this one woman, a black woman, who kept on posting stuff on, like, Leopold, right? And she'd be like, Leopold did a Holocaust of the black people in Africa. How come we never talk about that Holocaust? And I asked my grandpa, so I think that my grandpa, he would say that she's expressing dualistic software, like good guy, bad guy software, right versus wrong software, which is self-confirmatory. She's trying to create arguments and emotions, right? Now, I didn't like the people, like the race baiters, because I was like, okay, I thought the race baiters a lot of times were like COINTELPRO. Because like I said, I wanted race mixing, and I thought that the race baiters, they cause a lot of like chaos and anger and rifts between the white and the black people. But I didn't want too much riff. I wanted them to mix. So I remember at the time, like, I was even like writing that I didn't like Farrakhan. So I was part of the or part of the censorship movement. So I'm like, Farrakhan, I don't like him because even though he's for the black people, I didn't like him because he's against race mixing. He's against like white people. I was like, he's basically Hitler. And I thought that he might, because I looked at him and I was like, he looks kind of white. He's black, but he also looks kind of white. Maybe he's pretending to be for the black people, but really he's for the white people, because he teaches basically conservatism, like, teaches against, he's basically like a Nazi. He didn't like race mixing. He didn't like abortion. He didn't like women. He was against feminism. And I'm like, dude, he's just basically a white supremacist. He's good for the white supremacists. And I'm like, I don't like him. And it's interesting. Every time I would post this type of stuff against somebody, then they would start being censored. So I'll get to this more later. But so anyways, my point is, I went back to being a leftist, and I thought that I was doing what my grandpa wanted, because my grandpa seemed to me anti-religious, but he's not, though. He's not anti anything. He's the flow. He teaches the flow. But I didn't understand what the flow was at this time, and I'll get to that, and then how I started to understand later more. But I went back to my anti-white leftist mode, and this is like 2020.